Hello, and welcome to Connecting Hawaii Business on ThinkTech Hawaii. My name is Kathleen Lee, owner of Kathleen Lee Consulting, and I am your host for this program. ThinkTech Hawaii is a platform that encourages civic engagement through conversations that educate, enlighten, and inspire. We are currently live streaming on thinktechhawaii.com as well as on ThinkTech Hawaii's Facebook page. And viewers like you have the opportunity to ask us questions on the show by emailing them to, oh, I stuttered there, emailing them to questions at thinktechhawaii.com. So for today's show, we will be discussing anti-Asian violence. And this has been a very charged subject, especially for, or including myself as well. As some of you may know, last week, Governor David Ige ordered the Flags to Fly half-staff to honor the victims of the Atlanta shooting on March 16th that killed 8 individuals, 6 of them Asian women. The White House issued a statement condemning anti-Asian violence, and actor Daniel Day Kim also testified in Congress, highlighting the rise in anti-Asian violence in the United States. So this is a lot to unpack and process for the AAPI community, and I'm so glad to have our guest on the show. She is a Chozen-ji priest. Please welcome Cristina Moon. Hey, Cristina.
Hi, Kat. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for being here today. So before we go and launch into our conversation, tell us and our viewers a bit about yourself.
Sure. So, as Kat mentioned, I'm an ordained Zen priest here at Daihonzan Chozen-ji. We're all the way in the back of Kalihi Valley here on Oahu, and have been here since 1970. Well, have been established since 1972. So, Chozen-ji is a place where people of all backgrounds can come and do really intensive sort of spiritual training to build strength, resilience, and sensitivity in order to be able to be leaders in the world. And that can be a leader in your community, your family, your workplace, or on a larger scale if you're involved in public service and politics. I Prior to becoming a monk and then a priest here at Chozen-ji, I actually had a career in social change. And I started out really when I was in college at the University of Chicago. I was approached by a couple of folks who had been living inside Burma. They were Burmese, or from the country also known as Myanmar. And they had been involved in the democracy and human rights movement there. At the time, they were in exile. One was a refugee, and another had fled the country when he was a teenager, unable to return home. And they approached me after an event and said, "Wow, Christina, we really need people like you. Will you help us?" And being 18, I had no idea what that meant, but I said yes. And that led to 7 years of doing advocacy and humanitarian work in Southeast Asia. After that, I also worked on various social movements and political campaigns, and then ended up for a short time in Silicon Valley at change.org, the online petition platform. So also looking at the tech side of social change and the tools that we can use in the 21st century to create the world that we want to see. I think that's part of the reason why Kat had me on the show and why this topic felt natural for us, I think, because I have some background in social and political movements and have an understanding of what kind of response we can now see, but also, from my vantage as a Zen priest, have some thoughts on what people can do as communities, as community members, to try to grapple with some of the shock and the grief and anger we might be feeling, knowing that there are rising rates of anti-Asian violence happening throughout the country.
Right. And again, this has been an intense subject. And before we delve into it further, I want us to, and the viewers as well, to see the video of Chozen-ji, just so people have an idea of where you are currently in residence. So if we can pull up that video.
Training is hard because life is hard. The purpose of hard training, though, is to be free and happy. If the training isn't hard, it doesn't create the strength you need to live like that in life. That state of mind when you can keep calm in the midst of chaos and in the midst of conflict is what we want to achieve. The training is also hard because you have to transcend the limits that you impose upon yourself. And then you can find your true self. This training at Chozen-ji is unique because of our emphasis on entering Zen through the body. We really focus on breath, posture, and concentration. Concentration in the sense of being aware of everything around you. The things I see about the students at Chozen-ji who train seriously, they're clearer, their eyes sparkle, they're more alive, they're freer and happier. My advice to somebody who's really hitting up against a wall and has the determination to break through is, of course, to come live at Chozen-ji, but with determination that no matter what, you're not going to quit.
Thank you for sharing that with us, Christina. And so this gives people an idea of your background and where you currently are. And you also shared with us, and thank you for doing that, a graphic as to how people in the workplace can deal with conversations that are a bit challenging or emotionally charged, like anti-Asian violence. So if we could pull up that, the first graphic about supporting teams through uncertainty. So Christina, if you could walk us through that.
Sure. So the reason that I shared this graphic with Kat was I saw in the Star Advertiser on Monday, I think they were recapping the Sunday survey. 29% of respondents said that they were very concerned about the rising rates of anti-Asian violence. Some 50% said that they felt like they were concerned, but it wasn't an issue here in Hawaii, which makes a lot of sense just given our demographics. But for that 29%, that's a third of our community, of our workplace that has some real concern. And it might be because they have family and friends who are living on the mainland. They are just concerned overall, feeling a sense of solidarity with a larger Asian American community. So I think it's really important that workplaces recognize that this could be coming up for people for a significant portion of their workplace. My really good friend, Lola Elfman, runs this consulting firm, Develop Well, and created this graphic that was generally about supporting teams through uncertainty, but felt like really applicable here. And I thought it was great to share. One of the first things is you want to figure out how to have this kind of conversation at work. And sometimes it can be challenging and awkward because one, it can bring up strong emotions, but also it can feel like, oh, maybe, there are going to be differing, even conflicting opinions about this issue. So I think Lola's first do here of making space for on team calls and in one-on-ones, but also not pushing a conversation if it's not the right time is really wise. So this is something that I think people, especially Hawaii people, have a lot of sensitivity towards, sort of like being able to read the vibe. Is this the right time to have this conversation? But absolutely, if it feels like it's too tense or it's going to bring up a lot of raw feelings or it's not the right crowd to have the conversation in, there's no requirement that workplaces have these difficult conversations right now or at an arbitrary time. It has to be the right time. I think the next point in the graphic is a really practical one, which is rather than just creating space for people's feelings, to also give folks in the workplace actual resources if they need help, if they need to take a mental health day, if they need to take care of their families. Sometimes there might be logistics, especially if we're talking about people with, say, parents or elderly family members who are on the mainland. There's might be some long distance logistical coordination that they need to do. So offering the option of paid time off, reprioritizing work and goals so that other members of the workplace of the team can help sort of fill in certain places, knowing that some members of their team might need just a little bit more support. So I think those are sort of like the most important parts out of this set of advice from Lola and Develop Well that I thought was just really great and good to share.
And I like how it also goes over how workplaces shouldn't assume that everyone will need the same time or
Mhm.
support. So I appreciate that that's on there. Um, and then you have like a dude. The last one is create a working group to take on the work, and don't place all the work on yourself or the same group of people. Are you able to expand more on that?
Yeah, I think it's just like I think Lola's pointing to the need to be flexible. Um, Knowing that there will be some people within a team or a workplace who are less affected and have more bandwidth, whether that's by COVID or in this case, anti-Asian violence, just giving those people the chance to up and say, okay, I can jump on a Tiger team to make sure that this project gets done so that my colleagues can have a little more space, I think is really smart, rather than, sort of putting the onus on the whole team or the whole organization to push things forward. And then certainly we all know sometimes within teams and organizations, there can be those people who are always willing to do the work no matter what and won't say no. And then sometimes, you need to be really conscientious to make sure those people get time off and get a break as well.
Well, thank you for sharing that again. And I'm just in such gratitude because it is again. I will always I'll keep reemphasizing this. It's a very daunting and challenging subject to talk about. Even like the show today, I think I mentioned to you earlier, I was a little nervous because of the differing opinions when it comes to anti-Asian violence. How do we as individuals begin to even ground ourselves with everything that we've been seeing on the news?
Yeah, it's really hard. And before the show, I was sharing with Kat as well that I've had some experiences and some conversations grappling with this issue that have made me really unsettled. And, here I am living at a monastery and training really hard to be really calm, to have a resolve in challenging situations. And yet it affects me too. I don't think any of us, when we identify with a community that's experiencing this kind of collective trauma or challenge, we should just acknowledge that the first thing we can do is acknowledge that I'm not impervious to this. It might be pushing me in ways that maybe I don't even see on the surface, and to sort of like face that head on rather than just trying to, keep going, maybe pretending that we're okay.
Yeah, I mean the first step is acknowledging, right? And that's hard for a lot, especially with the Asian American community. We
Mhm.
have been, I think, anyway, we've been accustomed to kind of just keeping our heads down, right? And when like things like this happen, we understand that there is a collective trauma, and that's why we're just kind of coming to the forefront when it comes to having these conversations.
Mhm.
On that note, I want you to go further later on after our break about how else we can ground ourselves, both as individuals and as a collective. So we will be right back. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Connecting Hawaii Business on ThinkTech Hawaii. We are discussing anti-Asian violence and really how to discuss it. And on the show today, we have Chozen-ji priest, Cristina Moon. So right before we left off, Christina, our question to you was how do we as individuals ground ourselves? So how do we do that? And especially with coming from your background where you train daily to be balanced mentally, spiritually, physically? Like, where does one even start in kind of processing all this?
Yeah. So a bit of background is probably helpful. Chozen-ji is a Rinzai Zen dojo, Rinzai Zen monastery and temple. But we were founded by two very high-level martial artists, so we do consider ourselves a dojo. We have a lot of those martial arts that we can train in day to day, as well as the fine arts. It's part of our Zen training, as well as Zazen or seated meditation. And everything that we do, and this is where this is going to explain why my advice is going to differ a little bit from what people expect when they're talking to a Zen priest or a Buddhist or someone who's talking about meditation. Everything that we do is really informed by sort of that martial arts background. Even the way we sit and meditate is pretty physically and emotionally and mentally challenging. People are really surprised by that. The most significant part that challenges people is that we sit 45 minutes, and for 45 minutes we focus on breath, posture, concentration. The eyes are open and you cannot move. And if you move, someone might yell at you, tell you don't move. If you're falling asleep and nodding off, someone might yell, wake up. And if it goes on, you might even get kicked out of the dojo. So it's a pretty strict place. It is not overly strict for the sake of it, for the sake of being strict though. The reason we train the way we do is because we have seen over the thousands of people who've come through here and almost the 50 years that Chozen-ji's been in existence, that this is a recipe, a method that works to build that strength and sensitivity in people so that no matter what kind of situation they find themselves in, they feel like the master of that situation. They can see clearly. Our shorthand is see 180 degrees, feel your feet on the ground, keep your breath low and slow. And if you can do all of these things, then you're in a much better position to deal with really anything that's going to come at you. And in my time here, I've encountered and spoken to many students who literally said that this training saved their life. We're in the middle of a heart attack or an anaphylactic shock, allergic reaction, or almost got into an accident, saw a deadly traffic accident right next to them on the highway. Even people who've dealt with, working in the emergency room during COVID and those kinds of situations have been able to draw on this kind of training. And really, it was designed for people who are in those, I wouldn't say it was designed just for people who are in those intense situations, but knowing that the one thing we can count on sort of in life is that there are going to be such situations. The people that we love are going to pass away. We ourselves are going to die. That's the scale of the challenge that we aim to prepare people for. So it's a little different from, say, the mindfulness world, which is, instead of training like you would as a performance athlete, for example, the mindfulness stuff is like going to the gym, just for the sake of going to the gym and being healthy. And there's real benefit to that, and it's very valuable, but it's not the same as, you know what, I want to run a marathon. I want to try a triathlon. That you have to train for very seriously. So the first thing I would say about how people can ground themselves, there are some quick things that we can all do. We tend to discount the importance of our physical bodies, especially when we're going through a hard time. But we should really ground ourselves in our bodies. That phrase, come to your senses, which means stop being in your head, stop letting yourself go off down a rabbit hole of thinking. It's really apt in this situation. Come to your senses, hear everything, see everything, feel everything. Keep your breath.
So that first tip is stay still. That is what you're saying. So
I'm sort of like, broadly saying come back to your body, but it is really useful. It is pretty cool sometimes to just, okay, what if I do just sit here and I don't move? What do I start to notice? What do I notice about the posture that I was in? Oh, I was actually slouching a little and now it's uncomfortable. I hear the whir of the light in the room next to me. all these sorts of things will start to become more apparent when you do stop moving. And it's that's one way of coming back to your senses and being in your body. But another way I would say is to do things that are physically rigorous and challenging. So that might be some sort of exercise for people. Sometimes the sitting still without moving, if say it's for 10 minutes or something, that's physically challenging. But anything that you can do to bring you back to your senses in that way. The other thing I would really encourage people to do is specifically focus on their breathing. So you have to take a step back. To breathe properly, you have to sit and stand properly. Because if you have really bad posture and you're hunched over, it's literally hard to breathe. If I sit up straight, I've created a frame for the breath. And especially, I can send my breath down low below my belly button and have my breath be really big. There's all this science too, that if you accentuate the exhale, you make your exhale if you make your exhale really long, it actually stimulates your vagus nerve, which regulates all of your internal organs. It starts to reduce the acidity in your blood. It has all of these positive health benefits. And, so that in and of itself is reason to do it. But also it's going to really sort of tone your body and mind in a really interesting way. So just that long and slow exhale builds your concentration, builds your self-awareness in a way that's really good. So I'd say, yeah, come back to your senses. Maybe that's by sitting still, doing something physically challenging, like exercise, and then just really work on that breath in all situations. Can you remember to keep your breath low and slow? And then the last thing is see 180 degrees. So when our fight or flight, what was that?
What does that mean? See 180 degrees. So that's half a circle. You're talking about having a perspective that's just, but yeah.
I mean, literally see 180 degrees. So 180 degrees means all the way out to the left, all the way out to the right, but also up and down. So have your peripheral vision like really wide open as a physical, not metaphorical sense. Like just make sure that you can see, actually figure out what you have to do, relaxing the muscles in your face or clearing the clutter in your mind so you can see 180 degrees in every direction. When the fight or flight mechanism in our brain fires off, one of the things that happens is our peripheral vision shrinks and we get tunnel visioned. And this is one of our responses when we're experiencing trauma, even if it's the kind of emotional, mental, collective trauma we're experiencing today.
Wow, that's already calmed me down. Like, okay. No, but I absolutely appreciate how you bring it back to us having to ground ourselves first as individuals before we, attempt to even address or tackle the larger incidents that are going on. And thank you for that. That felt like a breathing exercise, by the way.
Yeah.
And I know you shared some great resources as well. So if we could pull up that slide for AAIP resources, could you tell us more about like these sources and like why you picked them or why you selected them?
Yeah, these I felt like might be the most relevant to folks here in Hawaii. Stop AAPI Hate has been the organization collecting documentation and reports of anti-Asian violence the most consistently. They just released that there have been 3,800 reported incidents or hate incidents targeting Asian Americans and mostly targeting women. They're a great organization to support and certainly just a resource if you know of anyone who's experienced anything like this, to encourage them to go document their experience, which is going to help get resources from the government, which is going to, encourage legislative efforts like to pass Mazie Hirono's bill that she just reintroduced in the Senate called the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act. President Biden has also encouraged the passage of that bill and has a White House memo specifying some resources. So that documentation really helps. The other resources are organizations that are active on the ground in places where attacks have been happening, particularly where they've targeted the elderly. So these are organizations that people can support and that consist of particularly young Asian Americans who are just volunteering to go walk the streets and walk people home, escort and chaperone them so that they feel safe. And then finally, Canary Song. Red Canary Song is a support organization that in particular works with Asian American women who work in the sex industry, sex workers, and I think sex work adjacent industries as well. So these are just unregulated workplaces where people don't have the same kind of protections that the rest of us have, or in a lot of ways, those protections are limited in many areas as they were in the case of the Atlanta shootings as well. I think the only thing, just to tie everything together, we can have the impulse to, we've got to do something. Don't just sit there, do something. But like Kat said, it's really important that we actually spend the time to also make sure that we can see clearly that we've prepared ourselves over time so that when crises and challenges happen like this, we can take the right action. There's this old Chinese saying that's unattributed. Some people think it's Lao Tzu. That's when the wrong person uses the right means can work in the wrong way. But when the right person uses the wrong means can still work in the right way. Which is all to say that who you are is as important as what you do. So in these moments when we're thinking about how do I have these conversations in the workplace? What do I do politically to make sure this doesn't happen? What can I do for my community? It's really equally important that we invest in ourselves and in the places and methods where we get that kind of spiritual strength rather than just jumping into the fray. I guess that's sort of like, if I could have one last call to action here, I've already had a lot, but when it comes to the institutions that historically our community has relied on to find this kind of spiritual strength that you want in these moments, those institutions, particularly Buddhist temples, martial arts dojos, they're facing a lot of challenges in terms of finding a new generation that's going to sustain them over time. And a lot of these places are closing down because they don't have members anymore. Part of that is, they haven't found a way to stay relevant to a younger generation, but there are also other complex factors that have caused people to pull away. And I think that these challenges that we're facing now present a really good opportunity for us to reinvest in these institutions. The last thing we want is for the situation to continue to deteriorate, for us to face other challenges in our lives. And we don't have a pastor or a priest or a sensei that we can go to like help us find that center and the strength to do the right thing.
Thank you, Christina. And see, that was my last question. I was going to ask you, what would you like to add? And you've covered it succinctly, so thank you. If people would like to get a hold of you or would like to learn more about what you do, where do they go online?
I've been writing quite a lot, and you can find my writings at my personal website, CristinaMoon.com. And you do note that there's no H in my name. My family spent some time in Latin America before we came to the United States, so I have the Spanish spelling for Cristina. But a Google search will usually turn me up too, even if you put an H in my name.
Thank you for that, Christina. And on that note, we will end our show. We thank everyone for tuning in today to discuss and how to deal with discussing anti-Asian violence. Our guest has been Cristina Moon, a Chozen-ji priest. My name is Kathleen Lee. And again, I always thank everyone for tuning in. Stay tuned for, we actually are on the show every other Wednesday, or the show is on every other Wednesday. So we'll see you then. Have a good afternoon.